Hey, what is up, guys? Chef Skill here, and today on a special edition of Trackside, we're going to go to the St. Louis Museum of Transportation, one of two museums in the United States that are considered national museums. I'm going to try and catch Y6A number 2156. So, let's try and catch it before it leaves for Roanoke for a 5-year loan.
First real action was a Union Pacific inspection vehicle that passed through the museum shortly after we arrived. The next locomotive that passed by was the Amtrak local. Shortly afterwards, the UP local, which was arriving to take over for the NS crews,
At the UP,
arrived
right.
at the museum.
It stopped.
Well, I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but I'll bet you those UP locomotives are going to lead it out of here. So they may break that in half. I don't know what they'll do exactly.
Since I was using my Nintendo 3DS to film most of this footage, I wasn't very steady with the camera. As you can see, while I'm talking with two rail fans right behind me, I am constantly whipping my head around trying to make eye contact with them, as a result not focusing on my camera.
Breaking away from the rest of his train and pull his locomotives up here. And then back that guy out, and then he'll back into the
Yeah. Seems reasonable enough.
because he's got two of them.
It's right around the Kirkwood grade, right?
Pardon me?
This is right around the Kirkwood grade, right?
The hill starts basically right in here.
Ah,
Kirkwood Hill.
He's definitely stopped and doing something.
yeah. On the move now.
After decoupling from its train, lease unit 2100 and a UP unit directly behind it head just before the switch, where the UP crews will start switching and align the track so the train can actually go into the throat directly next to the main line. Again, I'm not completely paying attention to my camera work. As a result, I'm pointing the camera up towards the sky. I soon realize my mistake and readjust for the position of the locomotive. Right now, all the switches are aligned, and the UP local starts to move into the museum. Workers start to immediately call out to rail fans standing by the tracks as the lease unit starts to approach the museum.
The lease unit.
RS unit directly behind the lease unit must have been recently repainted, because when we got there at the museum, there was still the painter's tape on the railings. A trolley had also been running that day, so the toots that you occasionally hear in the video are actually of the trolley moving back and forth on the route. After the UP got in position, a CSX auto-rack train came flying by on the Kirkwood grade. Lead locomotive was an AC 4400 CW locomotive, greatly weathered due to years of use. It was traveling on the main line, UP main line that was under track work, hence the slower speed down the Kirkwood grade.
Old auto rack.
After the CSX freight passes, Norfolk Southern gets underway with moving 2156. I begin to speak saying that as it starts to rain, Y6A 2156 starts to move. Of course, my dad immediately interrupts me by tapping me on the shoulder while the guy in front, who's recording the footage, looks back at me. This was my first ever time seeing the Norfolk Southern passenger equipment in the St. Louis area. 1218 back in 1990 had brought the Norfolk Southern equipment into St. Louis during the NRHS convention, but I was not born at the time and never seen it. The doghouse on the tender of 2156 and the auxiliary tender in front of it were both staples of the Norfolk and Western Y6A class. The auxiliary tender, though painted in the scheme for Norfolk and Western 611, was there because of the tool car also on scene. Shortly afterwards, when the train finally hooked up, then later got underway, the storm finally rolled in and heavy rain started to pelt many of the rail fans that had come there to see the locomotive off. I took shelter at a nearby rail shed, which you had seen in the previous clips, where much of the museum equipment laid. 2156 was on its way to Roanoke, and in 3 days' time, it would be in its hometown.
He's trying to get the rest of the local that took over for the Norfolk Southern crew. There's the end of the train. Right there. Alright. There she goes.
The following footage was shot on June 2nd, 2011. It features Union Pacific EFE-3, number 844, as it heads towards Alabama during the railroad's 150th anniversary. On a morning similar to that of the departure of 2156, on June 2nd, 2011, me and my dad decided to take a trip to Washington, Missouri to catch Union Pacific 484, number 844, as it heads towards Alabama.
There we go.
This was my first time seeing the locomotive in person. I had seen it numerous times in videos, and had always assumed that the locomotive was in a two-tone gray paint scheme that it had worn for a few years in 1990.
That's the only one in active service, so.
Dad soon calls out to me, and I have to rush back to him, hence why the camera points towards the ground for a brief moment. Before. This is my first time seeing the locomotive in person, so when the following comment pops up saying that the locomotive has been changed from two-tone gray to black, I wasn't aware that this had been done years ago.
From the two-tone gray to black.
The man in the Hawaiian shirt later in this clip is actually my dad. He and I went to see the locomotive in Washington, Missouri, and then later in Eureka when the locomotive ran past. Stopped in Washington, Missouri a bit early for servicing. The crews worked on greasing the rods and making sure everything was in proper working order so the locomotive could leave on time out of Washington, Missouri and up the Kirkwood grade later on. I took a few pictures of the crew as they worked on the locomotive, as well as some other shots of the locomotive. 844 is one of the only locomotives in the United States that still operates in regular service, meaning it hauls both freight and passengers on a regular basis.
Here it comes.
Shortly after the locomotive was done servicing, me and my dad headed out to the far outskirts of Washington, Missouri to catch the locomotive as it departed the area. Later in the clip, you'll notice that the camera shakes downward slightly as the rear car passes by. I flash a peace sign at the crew in a feeble attempt to say goodbye to them.
She's not a viewfinder. You're echoing. There we go.
Here in Eureka, Missouri, number 8044 blasts past the camera on its way up the Kirkwood grade.
It's highballing.